No More Heroes 3, what Suda51 has confirmed to be Travis Touchdown's final adventure. I really enjoyed the first two entries, but my enthusiasm for the series was dwindled somewhat by the spin-off Travis Strikes Again. So can this newest numbered entry win me back over and end this series on a high note? Well, let's find out. Okay, so it's business as usual for Travis as you control him to rise up the assassin's ranking. But this time, it's aliens you'll be taking on, as an ET-esque friendship from years prior results in planetary invasion today that Travis finds himself attempting to put a stop to. So yeah, it's basically the exact same plot as the previous two, but I didn't find it as entertaining as I did in those games for two main reasons. First of all, I think it's gone a little too over the top with its quirkiness. Now yes, I know this has always been an oddball series, that's partly why I've had fun with them in the past, but this one just bombards you with so much wackiness that it actually loses its sense of wackiness. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense, so allow me to elaborate. For as larger than life that the characters were, the settings were always fairly plain. It took place in a generic looking town and the fights would usually be in everyday locations, which in turn made the outlandishness of some of the events seem all the more bonkers. There's a boss fight in the second game where Travis gets this giant mech completely out of the blue. It's never set up beforehand, never brought up again, and so it feels delightfully insane. In this game, there's so many moments like it unfolding in these unusual locations that it doesn't feel as crazy. Some of it works. I like that they gave Gene the cat a manly voice, and this game of musical chairs is pretty fun, but if that mech boss from the second game took place in this game, it would feel like just another scene. It's significantly wackier than the other two, but that craziness lacks the same punch which made the previous games feel consistently surprising, Travis Strikes Again very much included. In the context of this game, these moments feel blasé. And there's a lot of it too. In the series' past, cutscenes typically played both before and after the ranking battles with the occasional exception. They were short but thoroughly entertaining moments of character interactions. But now there's time dedicated to the main villain and these bits where characters talk about Takashi Miike's films? What? The series has become increasingly more self-indulgent since it returned after 2. I don't care about the deeper lore of this series, just give me some deranged characters and humor and that's me satisfied. And what's with the whole TV episode structure this game has with opening and closing credits happening every time you rank up? Well, at least the visual novel part is short this time. Okay, not off to the best start, but before we get to the gameplay, I want to quickly talk about the visual presentation. People have defended the lackluster graphics, frame rate, and pop-up by saying it's intentional and that the other games weren't visually astounding either. But to me, the graphics of the other games felt intentionally stylized, and you can excuse them more because they're over 10 years old now. Part of me might be a little harsh on this game, as this is the first new release I've played this year, but is this really the best we can get in 2021? Looking at what the other games were able to achieve at the time, this just feels unintentionally poor. Anyway, No More Heroes 2 came out 11 years ago, and despite the huge time gap between these two games, this one still plays largely similar to what's come before. That's not immediately a bad thing, as long as it's still fun, so... is it? The Overworld is back from the first game, but rather than having the one environment, there's now 6 separate areas to explore. They're all as bland as Santa Destroy in the first game, but it was nice to ride a bike again, and there are some bonus collectibles to find if you're interested. Now in the original, you roamed Santa Destroy looking for jobs to earn money to pay a ranking fee to face the next assassin. It's almost the same thing here, but now there's designated matches dotted around each location which you have to find and complete 3 of before the game tells you to earn the money. I can sort of see why this was done, given how the Assassin's battles now work, but the money-making process now feels pointlessly elongated. And only certain matches count too, so if you've already got 2 blue crystals from doing 2 blue matches, you have to ride around looking for and completing a red crystal mission to satisfy the game's requirements, which is a little annoying. How about the jobs themselves? They're fine with the exception of this toilet one which you have to play every time you want to open up a save point on the Overworld, which is just easy and overplayed. They occasionally lack the humorous mundanity which contrasted against the action of the earlier games, but it's the type of gameplay which is easy enough to get into a satisfying rhythm of nailing a high score. I'd also say the same for some of the enemy waves you can partake in to make money. These generic guys are really easy to fight against, and so I did enjoy trying to get through all the waves without taking any damage. Speaking of the combat, that's always been the focal point of the series' gameplay, but in terms of how the encounters are structured, there's been a big change up. In the past, when you accumulated enough money to enter the ranking battle, you'd normally have to fight through a level of enemies before you got a chance to save and fight the boss at the end. But this time, it just skips straight to Sylvia giving you a brief lowdown on who you'll be fighting and the save point before the boss. This change is probably why you have required designated matches, but I don't know, I miss the momentum of the fighting where you kept moving through the level, picking off more and more enemies, feeling like a one-man army against loads of mooks before the end duel gave reaching the assassin a nice sense of build-up. Having most of the action take place in random rooms against 3 to 5 enemies, it's not quite the same, and the combat scenarios blend in a little. But how does the fighting actually play? It borrows elements from Travis Strikes Again, like the quick and strong attack options, jumping, which I barely used here, along with the special moves you can use. I actually really enjoy using these. The attacks, damage, rainfall, and slowing down time all feel good to pull off and use to your advantage. It did throw me off, however, how the button to initiate a special move select was R whilst locking onto an enemy was allocated to ZR. R is the more pronounced button on the controller, so using it for an always helpful thing like a lock-on felt more instinctive to me. I eventually got used to it, and it is a nitpick, but it was distracting for the first couple of hours. But anyway, it does all feel relatively satisfying to control, but the way the fights are now structured made it all feel more repetitive than usual. For all the issues the second game had with fighting tedium, it did have that sense of momentum I mentioned. You always felt like you were fighting your way to the main threat. Being stuck in a single area, only fighting a small amount of enemies, it doesn't feel quite as good. My issue with being unable to cancel attacks to dodge from Travis Strikes Again also remains present. Someone made a good argument for this in that it forces you to think before you strike, but I miss how much of a duel fights used to feel like, having to dodge, then hit, then dodge, and hit again. And these aliens have these more extravagant moves to keep note of, even as you fight a different kind, does get a bit overwhelming. And while the bosses are pretty good, there can be a few too many things going on at once that it feels like a bit of an onslaught of things that can damage you. There's this roulette thing you get if you die, and if you die in one area enough times, it slows down enough so I could just regain my health and carry on until I got killed again and could select it again. On the flip side, you have these fights taking place in mechs, which are absurdly easy to take care of. With a couple of exceptions, these bosses are forgettable, but somewhat interesting in the moment. On the whole, the gameplay is fleetingly enjoyable, yet not particularly engaging. Where the first two had me upright focused on what was happening in-game, I found myself slouching on the sofa going through the motions here. Now, one of two things is happening here. I'm either experiencing fatigue with this series, or I just do genuinely find this one lacking compared to the others. But perhaps the two go hand in hand. It offers little innovation, which is especially notable to someone who only played 2 a year ago, and yet the changes made to the spirit of the series ultimately rubbed me the wrong way. I know there's people who have really enjoyed this game, and fair play to them. I certainly don't think it's a bad game. I did get the odd moment of satisfaction and fun out of it, but I simply didn't get the same level of entertainment value I got from the first 2 games. Yeah, take a shot every time I've said that in this video. I have a real soft spot for those titles, and it's a shame I've struggled to embrace the Switch era entries.
What do you think about when the 15th round you're coming out?